Hi, everyone, and welcome to our VidaLive event for the month of July. We are so glad that you guys are joining from all across Canada, from North America, from the States. It is just so good to have you guys, and we're just going to join together for a little bit to hear about our churches in Guatemala. So we're joined today by Rita Peters, and she is with two of our pastors, Pastor Mynor and Pastor Hector. And they're going to share with us a little bit about what's going on in the churches in Guatemala. So as always, there is going to be a time where you guys can ask some questions at the end. But again, just want to say welcome. If I didn't say it already, my name's Kristen, and I'm the Canadian Operation Manager for Impact Ministries. And again, we just want to say thank you for joining us tonight. So Rita, I'm just going to hand it right over to you, and you can just start the interview. You can let us know who you're joining with. And we're just so glad again that everyone has taken some time out of your day to join us tonight.
Thank you very much, Kristen. And we are so pleased for this event. And we are thrilled to be able to let you know a little bit about our church here in Guatemala. Our church is called Rio de Vida, which means River of Life. And we have two pastors that have been ordained in the last 20 years. And one of them is Hector, to my far side. And he grew up in the school as a boy and graduated, became a teacher, served in the ministry for a number of years before we moved him into serving in the church. And he did such a marvelous job, and we saw his gifting. And it didn't take long before we chose to ordain him as the pastor. He is the main pastor over all three of our congregations. And Mynor joined our staff in the schools as well when he first came to us. And just hearing his heart and hearing how God works in his life, it also didn't take us a long time before we chose that he would also be one of our ordained pastors. But I'll let them tell you more about their story. But to begin with, I would like to ask Hector to tell you a little bit about how did the Rio de Vida Church start? Where did it all begin?
Okay. Hola a todos, que el Señor les bendiga.
Good afternoon to all of you. May God bless you.
¿Cómo empezamos la iglesia?
How did we start the church?
Para mí, la iglesia inició cuando...
For me, the church began when...
Recuerdo cuando hermano Les y hermana Rita una vez nos convocaron a su casa.
I remember when Les and Rita invited us to their home.
Y nos invitaron a compartir un tiempo, un pequeño devocional.
And they invited us to their home just to have a small devotional time.
Éramos 8 jóvenes.
We were 8 young fellows.
Y pues allí tuvimos un devocional, hermano Les con su guitarra.
Les had his guitar, and we were just a small group.
Canto.
I still remember the song we sang.
Piensa en el Señor, piensa en su gracia.
Think about the Lord, think about his grace.
Y recuerdo que para mí eso lo tengo muy presente.
I'm very aware of that beginning.
Pero justamente en ese tiempo estábamos pasando un tiempo muy difícil, complicado.
And at that time, we were actually going through some very difficult times,
de repente,
some big changes.
Empezamos a reunirnos en la casa de hermano Les y hermana Rita.
But we began to meet together in Les and Rita's home.
Y éramos como 3 o 4 familias.
There were maybe 3 or 4 families.
Del colegio mismo.
From the school.
Y empezamos a congregarnos por las tardes, a las 4 de la tarde.
And we started meeting together on Sunday afternoons at 4 o'clock.
Pues no teníamos claro si empezar una iglesia.
And we weren't sure if a church was beginning or...
Era mientras tal vez nosotros buscáramos una congregación.
Maybe it was more while we were looking for a church to join that we were meeting there.
Pero nos gustó estar juntos.
But we loved being together.
Empezamos a tener muy buenos tiempos.
We started to have excellent times together.
Tiempos de adoración.
Worship times.
De tiempos de prédica.
And a small
Y de
sermon would be
repente, pues
given.
empezamos a crecer en la casa.
And we began to
Ese grupo empezó
grow.
a crecer en la casa de hermano Les y hermana Rita.
And in Les and Rita's house, the small group began to grow.
Y después, como teníamos el colegio de Chamché,
And since we had a school over
nos
in,
trasladamos al colegio, a una de las aulas del colegio Chamché.
that after a while, we decided to, instead of meeting in their home, we would meet in a classroom in the school.
Pero se fue dando de manera natural, creo yo,
But it just sort of happened very naturally.
porque creo que no sé si estaba en los planes, pero de tal manera
I
que
don't know if it was in the plans.
en esta clase de repente ya no cabíamos,
And after a while, that classroom, we didn't have
porque
room in
más
it anymore
personas se estaban
because
agregando.
more people started coming.
Y recuerdo que se rompió la pared de una de las clases grandes que teníamos allá.
And I remember that they took out a wall in one of the big classrooms.
Y cuando se rompió pensábamos que era muy grande,
And so then it became almost twice the size. We thought it was huge now.
pero al poco tiempo crecimos
In a short while, we
y
grew
se
again
llenó ese lugar.
and it was full again.
Y para mí, pues, en aquel entonces yo estaba viviendo en el colegio Chamché,
And I was actually living in our Chamche school at that
Mis-
time.
juntamente con otros compañeros, poníamos las sillas, las bocinas,
With
pues
a few of the other fellows, and we would set up the chairs and we would set up the speakers, and,
preparábamos el lugar para los servicios de los domingos en la tarde.
and we always prepared the place for the
Pero
Sunday
lo interesante
services.
es de que pasaban los días y los meses, íbamos creciendo.
And only a few months went by and we
Más
were growing so
familias
much. More families started
De
coming.
los niños de los colegios
It was families of the children from the
empezaron a
school.
conocer al Señor
They began to know
a
the
través del
Lord.
colegio, llegaban a la iglesia.
So through the school, they learned about the church and they started coming to
Pues
the
nosotros
church.
estábamos muy contentos
And we were very happy.
y ya éramos un grupo bastante grande
And we were growing more and
y
more.
era un servicio por la tarde y entonces pensábamos que, bueno, si es una iglesia, deberíamos tener los servicios por la mañana.
So we thought after a while, well, if this is actually a church, maybe we should have Sunday morning services like everyone else.
Pero pasaron unos cuantos años hasta que cambiamos nuestro servicio por las mañanas.
But it took a few years before we changed our afternoon services to the morning.
Era muy alegre para
It
nosotros
was very happy for us,
ver
joyful for
un
us.
montón de personas llegando al Señor,
There were so many people coming to the Lord.
saber de familias
Uh,
muy fuertes en la fe católica,
there were families that had been so strong in the Catholic faith,
viniendo al Señor
and they were coming to
y
salvation to the
entregando su
Lord
vida al Señor de
and
una
giving
manera
their
fuerte.
life to the Lord in a new
Y
way.
eso hacía que también otras personas vinieran a los pies del Señor.
And that also brought other people to the
Pero
Lord too.
crecimos en estas dos aulas,
But in these two
ya no
classrooms,
cabíamos tampoco.
until we didn't fit there
Después,
anymore,
hermano Les se le ocurrió aperturar la cancha de arriba.
then Les got the idea, why don't we use the basketball court that we had at the top of the school?
Solo teníamos malla alrededor.
We only had like a wire fencing around the
De
outside
hecho,
of it.
algunos le decían la iglesia, el gallinero.
Some people called it like that our church was like a chicken coop.
Entonces, pues ahí nos congregábamos nosotros
But we met there.
y pues al principio, como siempre, pensábamos que era muy grande el lugar,
And so at the beginning we thought, oh, this is a huge spot.
pero siguieron llegando
But
personas.
more and more people started coming.
Y de verdad estamos muy contentos como el Señor ha ido levantando la iglesia Río de Vida.
And we're so thankful for how the Lord has made the Rio de Vida
Y
Church
cómo el
grow.
Señor ha usado los colegios para
And-
alcanzar a las
And
familias.
how the Lord has used the schools to reach the families.
Y cómo la iglesia ha sido, la iglesia ha sido parte de levantar familias.
the church has been used to raise up families for the Lord.
juntamente con los colegios y otros programas del ministerio.
So together with the schools and other programs that we have in the church.
Pues en todo lo que yo les conté, ahí estaba yo.
And in all of that, what I told you about, I was there.
Yo era demasiado joven y me dieron la oportunidad de dirigir la alabanza. Tenía como 16, 17 años.
When we started, I was maybe 16, 17 years old, and
No
they
sabía
gave
cómo
me the
hacerlo,
privilege
pero,
of leading worship, but I didn't even know how to do it.
pero me dieron la oportunidad
But they
y
gave me the
de
opportunity,
ahí me adentré mucho a servir al Señor.
and that's where I decided very deeply that I would serve the
Y la
Lord.
verdad ha sido una gran aventura
And it has been a big
de
adventure.
ver cómo el Señor, la mano del Señor ha estado en cada etapa de la iglesia.
And to see how God's hand has been leading every step of the way in the
Y ahora
church.
ustedes pueden ver tal vez un poco de cómo es la iglesia hoy en día.
And now you can see a little bit how the church is today.
Nada que ver como lo que era antes.
It's not anything like what it was before,
Pero ahí sí que la gloria sea para el Señor.
but the glory all goes to the
Y
Lord.
luego pues se inició la iglesia de Purulá
Oh, él va a contar esa
y
historia.
la iglesia de Mocuán.
Sí. Eso
Ajá.
ya le vamos a
Ok.
pedir a él contar, ¿verdad?
Sí, sí.
So I was just going to add one little part. When Les and I moved to Guatemala, we had both previously been ordained as pastors, but we actually didn't expect to start a church. We actually had kind of almost decided that that's not what we were going to do. But like Hector told the story, you know, people started coming to our home and we started having these little services, and suddenly Les and I looked at each other and said, what's happening here? Are we starting a church? You know, that was not in our plans, but we've come to realize that it was in God's plans, and it's always better to go with God's plans in what we do, right? And you can't really see this building, but we're in a building now that can probably house, ¿cuántas personas caben aquí? Como 2,000.
Como 1,600.
About 1,600 people could sit in here if it was full. Of course, with the pandemic, things went down a little bit, but we have seen many people come to Jesus, and it's wonderful. So I'm going to ask Mynor now to tell you a little bit about how it is that we have more than one congregation. Like, how did another congregation start? How did we start more congregations than just one?
Bueno, que el Señor les bendiga, hermanos. Qué bueno
May
verles
God bless you. It's so good to see you
y compartir con ustedes
and to
este
share with
tiempo.
you this time.
Pues sí, es emocionante
It's exciting
todo lo que Dios ha hecho
to see
y
everything God has
lo
done
que el Señor está haciendo
and what he's doing
en las iglesias, ¿verdad?
in the
Y
churches.
en cada uno de los lugares donde pues hemos nosotros visto la necesidad que han tenido los niños y las familias.
And we have seen the needs that people have had in other places, not just here.
Y pues estaba pensando en que también cuando hermano Héctor estaba hablando de las iglesias o de la iglesia y cómo fue creciendo, también estaba pensando en que cuando estábamos en los colegios de Baja Verapaz, que era donde yo empecé a trabajar tal vez directamente, ¿verdad? Desde que vine.
When I was listening to Hector explaining about when I first joined, I started working in the outlying schools that we have.
Entonces, ahí, hablando del colegio específicamente en el área de Mocuán, que está ahí en Purulá, en ese colegio todavía no había una iglesia establecida.
When I started working in the Mocuán school, we didn't have a church there at that time.
Entonces, habíamos empezado a tal vez a tener algunas ideas mientras estábamos allá con algunos maestros, de tener algunas actividades con los niños que venían al colegio, y esa era parte de las ideas que teníamos al principio.
So at the beginning, what we thought is to have some activities for the children outside of school. That's how the idea first began. Just have some activities for the children that weren't actually part of the school day.
Entonces, como estábamos sirviendo en la iglesia aquí, también en Tactic, estábamos sirviendo como líderes de células, recuerdo yo, éramos líderes de una célula en Tactic.
So myself and some of our teachers that were working in the Moquan school, of course, we were part of the church here in Tactic. And we were also leaders of some of the cell groups that were being established here.
Entonces, una de las primeras ideas que surgieron fue que podíamos comenzar con una célula con los niños que no iban a ninguna iglesia.
And so we thought, why don't we start a cell group in Moquan with some of the children that weren't attending any church?
Y entonces hablamos de eso con los hermanos, hablamos de eso, recuerdo yo, con los líderes, con hermano Hector, hermano Les, hermana Rita, y hablamos de poder ir y empezar una célula. Entonces, así comenzamos los días jueves a reunirnos y a decirles a los niños que queríamos juntarnos con ellos para tener un pequeño servicio de células.
So that's how we started. We talked to the leaders, to Hector, to Les and Rita, and we decided that in Moquan, we would tell all the children, we're going to have a service on Thursday evening. It's going to be a cell group service. And that's how we began there.
Entonces, los niños comenzaron a llegar y al principio fueron como 2 o 3 veces que solo llegaron los niños, llegaron como unos 10 tal vez o 12 niños ahí a la célula con nosotros y con unos maestros que nos quedamos ese día, nos quedamos a las 6 de la tarde para tener esa reunión con ellos.
So the first 2 or 3 times, only the children arrived. Maybe about 10 to 12 children came to the school at 6 o'clock. We stayed, some of us as teachers, we stayed in the school and we received them for a small service.
Entonces, comenzamos a tener esas reuniones y así como decía hermano Héctor también de cómo fue creciendo acá, de repente nosotros vimos que los papás de los niños empezaron a integrarse a esa célula. Empezaron a venir, empezaron a conocer quiénes éramos y empezó a crecer esa célula ahí en Moquan.
And so after the first 2 or 3 weeks, then all of a sudden we noticed that some of the parents started coming along with their children, and they started to become interested in who we are and what we were doing.
Entonces, lo que me llama la atención era de que empezamos en un aula también, en un aula del colegio, y conforme fueron llegando más, nosotros nos dimos cuenta con el paso del tiempo, con los maestros que estábamos ahí sirviendo, nos dimos cuenta de que pues como que ya no iban a caber si estábamos todos reunidos. Hacíamos un círculo en el aula, pero pues cada vez el círculo se hacía más grande y más grande. Entonces dijimos que íbamos a usar el salón o teníamos que como pasarnos directamente al salón para ya no usar el aula, sino ir al salón a tener los servicios.
I thought it was so interesting how Hector explained how the whole thing started in one classroom at the school here in Tactic. We started in a classroom in Moquan as well. But after a while, the classroom became fuller and fuller to the point where we decided we better use the bigger chapel place that we had for the children.
Y entonces, al pasarnos ya al salón que teníamos, fue que estuvimos platicando con con los que estábamos ahí sirviendo, con los maestros y algunos niños también que nos empezaron a preguntar por qué no teníamos servicio los domingos. Ellos querían que pues nos reuniéramos también los domingos, ya no solo como células, sino que los domingos también hubiera alguna actividad y empezamos a platicar de eso. Entonces ir allá los domingos también y a las 9 de la mañana tener un pequeño servicio ya formal con ellos.
So some of the children, they began to ask us, why do we not have Sunday services as well? And so that's where the idea arose that maybe we should start having Sunday services as well. And so that's what we moved to at that point.
Y comenzó, entonces comenzamos la iglesia también de esa manera, empezando, bueno, después de todo ese tiempo fue que empezamos a ir los domingos con los mismos maestros que habíamos comenzado la célula. Seguimos los jueves y también íbamos los domingos, ¿verdad? Esos 2 días nos quedamos fijos para estar allá con ellos. Y cómo fue que Dios en su gracia y su misericordia empezó como a traer a los papás de los niños para que cuando se abrió los domingos ese servicio, entonces ya las personas o los adultos que vieron que se tenía un servicio allá empezaron a acercarse también, a preguntar a qué horas eran los servicios y si ellos podían integrarse, y empezaron a integrarse también.
Sí. En un momento te voy a preguntar cuál es el tema principal, eso de la restauración. So after a while, like the parents, more and more parents started coming into our church, and it became like a normal thing to have Sunday services, Thursday services, and it basically turned into what we call here a congregation, because we often talk about how we are one church and we're called the Rio de Vida Church, but we actually now have 3 congregations. Before the Mokuan congregation began, there was another school, which is in a town called Purula. Many of you will have heard that word. And in Purula, we also started with a cell group. And the cell group grew and grew until the leaders one day said to Les and I, we have about 100 people coming out to cell group every Thursday night. And we said, wow, that's not really a cell group anymore. That sounds like a congregation. So then we actually began to have Sunday services there as well. Now, our church is a little bit different than most of the churches around here, and it's because of what our main theme in the church is, what our main kind of purpose for the people is. I'm going to ask Hector to share with you briefly what the Rio de Vida Church kind of stands for.
Bueno, nuestro enfoque es mucho en la
Our
restauración de vidas
focus is very much in the restoration of lives
a través del evangelio de
through
Jesucristo.
through the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Para nosotros la palabra restauración tiene mucho valor.
We have a lot of value that we place on the word restoration.
Bueno, sí, es muy amplio en el sentido de la restauración del Señor a través del evangelio del
It's a
Señor.
very big word in what the
Pero para
gospel
hacer
can
algo
do.
más específico,
But more specifically,
algo que sucede mucho en las congregaciones acá,
what happens very much in the congregations around
no en
here,
todas,
not in all of them, but
pero por ejemplo, un hermano de la iglesia
many times in a church, one of the brothers
peca o
maybe falls into sin.
pues comúnmente son rechazados, ¿verdad?
And in most of the churches, not all of them, but they are actually rejected from the church
Entonces,
when they fall into
a veces
sin.
estas personas no encuentran un lugar,
And these people
quieren seguir
often,
buscando al Señor,
these people, they want to continue seeking the Lord, but they don't find a place to do that.
entonces nosotros como Iglesia Río de Vida hemos tratado de abrazar a este tipo de personas.
So in our church, Rio de Vida, we have tried to embrace those kind of people.
Y los hemos tratado de recibir con los brazos abiertos
And we have received them with open arms
para mostrarles que nuestro Dios es un Dios que restaura
to
nuestras
show them
vidas.
that our God is a God who restores lives.
Y entonces en algunos casos pues les damos un seguimiento de restauración de
And
a su proceso que están llevando, ¿verdad?
so many times we help them in that process
Porque en otras,
of being restored to the
porque en
Lord.
otras iglesias pues prácticamente han sido expulsados, ¿verdad?
Because in many of our churches around here, people have actually been expelled from the church.
Y pues podemos decir que algunas de estas familias, incluso parejas, gracias a Dios, pues ya estando en nuestra congregación, pues sirven con nosotros.
And so we can say now that some of these very people now are serving alongside of us in our church.
Y podemos ver que el Señor restaura
And we
vidas.
can see that God
Y
restores
es lo que queremos
lives.
sembrarle a
And-
todos los
And
hermanos.
that's what we want to sow into the lives of all our people.
Que al final, si uno de
that-
nosotros caemos, o
That if
pecamos,
one of us falls or we
podemos sentir
fall
el
into
apoyo de
sin,
alguno de los hermanos
that
para que
we
podamos
can
ser
feel that
restaurados
sense of love and restoration
en el
in our
Señor.
people, in the Lord.
y
of
seguir
course.
caminando
And
juntos
to
en la fe.
continue walking in the faith
Y-
together.
Y este enfoque de la restauración, estamos trabajando en la restauración de familias también,
And we're also working in the restoration of families, of
matrimonios,
marriages,
en muchas áreas
and
más
many areas
de la vida de cada uno de los
in the
hermanos.
lives of many of the people. Les has often said to the church, our church is like a hospital. We accept anyone to come, and God is here to help, to restore, to forgive, to restore us, to build us up, to heal our hearts, and then to use us for His glory, right? And it's all in Him. I also asked if each of them could think of just a short story of somebody that that they can think of that was amazing how God restored some lives. I don't know who wants to go first. A short story.
Ah, bueno, yo creo de que a mí me impresionó mucho lo que empezó a suceder con las familias en la iglesia en Baja Verapaz, ¿verdad? En Mocuán, cuando estuvimos allá, porque muchas de estas familias se sentían, como decía hermano Héctor, se sentían como rechazadas y no habían como decidido ya no ir a ninguna iglesia.
There were many families that we were receiving to our Mocuán congregation that, like Brother Hector said, they had been basically expelled from some other church, and they had basically decided, we're not going to church anymore.
Pero estando ya pues en la congregación, con nosotros platicando con ellos, hablando y pasando tiempo con estas familias, yo recuerdo muchas veces visitarles a ellos cuando estábamos viviendo ahí y ellos visitarnos a nosotros, y pues entablamos mucho, tal vez una comunicación con ellos, donde nosotros pudimos saber qué era lo que sucedía en el corazón de esta familia y
But
ayudarle.
we began to spend time with these people and listen to them and let them open their hearts and share with us what was happening inside of them, and try to understand them and then to be able to help them.
Y entonces, uno de los resultados de todo eso, de conocerles y de mostrarles lo que el Señor quería para sus vidas, fue de que al final ellos se volvieron personas que empezaron a ayudar y a servir mucho en la iglesia. Eran los que más estaban apoyando, eran los que más estaban interesados y estaban pendientes de la iglesia, de los que estábamos ahí como líderes. Y son de mucha ayuda en la iglesia de Mocuán hasta hoy en día. Están allá sirviendo al Señor y ahora yo puedo ver, ellos son de mucha influencia en Mocuán. O sea, la gente los puede ver a ellos como una familia tal vez ejemplar, podríamos decir.
So these people that are living in Mocuán, and they had felt so rejected, and as we began ministering to them and helping them and seeing them restored, they became the ones who were most attentive in the church in helping and serving and everything that needed doing. And they just became so attentive to all the leaders there. And even in the whole community, because it's a small community, they are now almost like an example to everyone of a restored family. And it's just been such a blessing to work with them. Hector, do you have a short story of somebody that?
Okay. Yo tengo dos rápidos, los voy a
I
contar.
have two stories, but very quickly.
Hermano Alfredo, él,
Brother Alfredo, we call him.
él trabaja en el Ministerio de Educación.
He works in the Ministry of Education,
O sea, tiene una posición muy importante.
which is a very important place here in the
Y
society.
nosotros como colegios, pues le teníamos un poco pena a él.
And our schools, we all had a little bit of fear of him
Porque él no estaba contento con los colegios.
because he wasn't happy with the Christian schools.
Pero de repente supimos que inscribió a su hijo en el colegio.
But all of a sudden we found out that he actually registered his son in one of our schools.
Y entonces eso también nos causó un poquito más de preocupación porque ya tenía a su hijo con
And that
nosotros.
actually worried us a little bit because he really had a real inside view now, being part of the Ministry of Education as to, what's all happening in our school.
Resulta que un día uno de sus nietos que también estudia con nosotros
And some of his grandchildren also worked with
lo
us.
invita a comer a su casa.
And
El abuelo, hermano Alfredo, invita a su nieto.
so one day, the Don Alfredo, who had some of his grandchildren in our school, invited his grandchildren to his house to come and have lunch.
Entonces ya era hora del almuerzo y se sirvieron la comida y de repente iban a empezar a comer.
And they were sitting down at the table and they had the food all served and they were ready to start eating.
El niño como de 6 años,
And the 6-year-old
y él
grandson,
dijo, ¿no vamos a orar?
he said, aren't we going to pray before we eat?
Y él se quedó así sin saber qué responder.
And he kind of didn't know what to answer to that.
Entonces a él se le ocurrió decir, bueno, ¿por qué no tú no oras?
So because he didn't quite know what to do, he said to his 6-year-old grandson, why don't you pray?
Y entonces el niño oró.
And so the boy prayed.
Y él me cuenta, hermano Alfredo me cuenta
And Brother Alfredo now tells us
que la oración de su nieto le impactó mucho.
that prayer of his 6-year-old grandson, it just really touched his
Lo que le
life.
habían enseñado en el colegio,
Because they had taught him how to pray in
de
school,
cómo agradecer por los
how to
alimentos.
thank God for all the food.
Entonces la oración de su nieto le produjo un deseo de conocer al Señor.
And it actually produced a desire in Hermano Alfredo to seek the Lord.
Y entonces, bueno, dijo, yo necesito ir a la iglesia.
And he thought, you know what? I need to go to church.
Y cuando llegó a la iglesia, para nosotros fue una sorpresa.
When he started coming to church, it was a big surprise to us.
Y después que quería conocer al Señor, que quería bautizarse,
And then he wanted to become a
le di
Christian.
el
He wanted to
discipulado
be baptized.
de bautismo.
And he received this little bit of teaching that we give before baptism.
Bueno, personalmente yo estaba muy contento por él.
Personally, I was very, very
Era un
happy.
milagro
It was a miracle.
de estar oponiéndose al colegio.
He had been so opposed to the Christian schools.
Ahora ya era parte de
And now
nosotros.
he's part of us.
Y hasta hoy en día él ha sido uno de los hermanos que me ha bendecido mucho.
He is one of the brothers that has blessed me a lot.
Y aquí y asiste con nosotros.
And he attends church
Y el
here with
otro
us.
es de una hermanita.
And another
Clara.
another story is about a little sister.
Ella para ir a la iglesia tenía que escaparse porque su esposo no le daba permiso.
It was a little lady that she actually had to escape. She had to kind of hide and go out of her home
Tenía
to
que
come
salir a
to church.
escondidas.
She had to come to church, but in secret because her husband wouldn't let her come to church.
Y algunas veces su esposo se dio cuenta y le pegó.
A few times her husband realized where she had gone and he hid her.
Estuvimos orando mucho por
We
ella
prayed so much for her.
y gracias a Dios, pues ya ahora su esposo hasta le manda a la iglesia
And now the amazing thing is that her
con los
husband
hijos.
now actually sends her to church with her children,
Y estamos
with
orando
their
por él.
children. And we're praying for him.
Y para mí, para nosotros, para la Navidad pasada,
But for us, this last Christmas,
Él vino a la iglesia
he came to church.
y era un milagro también.
And that was a miracle too.
Entonces seguimos orando por esa familia
But we continue to pray for this family.
y yo sé, Dios está restaurando esta familia.
I know
también.
that God is restoring this
Sus
family.
hijos están involucrados en el ministerio de alabanza.
The children are joining in the worship
Y-
leading.
Y Dios primero, pues un día su esposo pueda entregar su vida
And
al
we
Señor y estar con
trust-
nosotros aquí adorando al Señor.
We trust that one day that the husband will also
Y
accept
así
the
hay
Lord.
muchas otras
And
historias
there are many more stories
donde
that we
podemos
can
ver
tell
que
you.
es el Señor obrando.
We can
así.
see that it's God doing the work. It's
Pero-
God doing the work.
Y estoy seguro que también las oraciones de muchos de ustedes
And I'm sure that the
Ujú.
prayers
Para el
of many of
ministerio,
you for our ministry,
para la iglesia,
for the
por
church,
nosotros,
for us as leaders,
todo ha sido parte
it
de
has all been a
y
part
estamos
of
contentos
what
por lo que el
we're
Señor hace.
seeing, of what God is doing here. I don't know what time it is.
No, that's great. It's so good to hear some of those stories and stuff. We do have lots of questions coming in, so maybe we'll take a few moments to answer some of those questions if that's good with you guys. We do have a question here, and this one's for Pastor Hector. What's the biggest challenge you face as being that kind of head pastor, lead pastor of all three churches?
Reto más grande siendo
El reto más grande es levantar más líderes.
my greatest challenge is to raise up more leaders.
Y yo creo que es parte de la visión también que tenemos.
And that's part of our vision.
Y yo sé que es un trabajo no muy fácil,
It's not a very easy job.
requiere mucho tiempo,
It takes a lot of
pero creo que es
time,
el reto más grande.
but it is the biggest
Porque si
challenge.
levantamos a otros, yo creo que mientras yo mengue, como dijo Juan el Bautista, que los demás crezcan.
So just as John the Baptist said, if I, what's the word in English? If I become less and less, decrease, then all the others can increase too, that we're raising up as leaders,
Para que el reino del Señor se siga
so
extendiendo.
that the kingdom of God can expand.
That's awesome. And there's just kind of a follow up to this too. That was one of the challenges, but what is, and you can ask both pastors this question, but what is your favorite part of being a pastor?
Pues yo creo que cosa favorita de ser pastor, ¿qué? ¿Así personal o de nada? Pues yo creo de que tal vez algo que para mí me da mucho, mucho placer y me gusta verlo es cómo los hermanos están como desarrollando sus talentos o desarrollando sus habilidades, ¿verdad? Porque eso me motiva y cuando, por ejemplo, ahora con los jóvenes, eso es lo que tal vez yo veo, cuando alguien está ahí y aprende y empieza a crecer y todo eso, entonces a mí me emociona ver eso y yo digo, muchos más pueden hacer lo mismo y pueden seguir creciendo de esa manera. Entonces, eso es algo que a mí me agrada, verles crecer a ellos.
I think what pleases me the most, what makes me the most excited is to see others developing their gifts and their talents and using them and growing in serving the Lord. And I know there are many more that can also join them. Hector?
Pues casi lo mismo.
I think almost the
Ver
same
a los
thing,
demás crecer
to see the others grow,
y que crezcan en el Señor. Esa es
that they would grow in the Lord,
ver cómo han sido cambiados por el Señor
to see how God is changing them,
y uno siendo parte de eso.
and to be able to be a part of that.
Creo que esa es mi parte favorita.
I think
y
that's my
tal vez
favorite
la
part.
segunda es cuando hay oposición y luego se vuelven parte de nosotros. Esa es mi parte favorita.
I think my favorite part is when somebody's opposed to us and then they become part of us.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So we have a question here from Jeff. First, he says, thanks so much for sharing your stories. And then the question is, as we pray for you, what are some specific cultural challenges that the churches and you as pastoral leaders are facing in the future?
¿Empiezo yo?
Sí, pues.
Ok. Tal vez mucha ideología a través de las redes sociales, medios de comunicación que invade mucho a los niños, a las familias.
Oh, la tecnología.
La tecnología, ajá.
Yeah, the technology and how that's just coming in and just taking over so many of the children and the parents even. And
Yo creo que está cambiando mucho la mentalidad de muchos de los niños y de los jóvenes hoy en día.
it's changing so much of how the children and the young people are thinking.
Compartirles del Señor a ellos hoy en día tiene que ser otra manera, creo yo.
It's like to share to them about the Lord and the gospel. It almost has to be in another way.
Porque ahorita muchos de los niños y los jóvenes manejan mucha información.
Because the young people and the children now, they're working with so much information that they're getting.
Y entonces es como una lucha contra eso.
And it's almost like a battle against that.
Y otra cosa que también es un reto para nosotros es con respecto a los matrimonios.
Another huge challenge is the marriages.
Entonces, gracias a Dios nosotros hemos organizado actividades de matrimonios.
We have organized activities for marriages.
Porque la vida matrimonial acá es un poco diferente.
The life of a marriage here is quite different.
Entonces, hay cosas que hay que romper en la mente de ellos para que puedan valorar su matrimonio.
We have to kind of like break down some of their
Valorar la
sort of
relación.
thoughts. They don't value the relationship of the marriage the way God meant them to.
Y no somos muy dados a buscar ayuda.
And we don't tend as our culture, we don't tend to look for help when we have problems.
Buscamos ayuda cuando ya se rompió alguna relación. O algo así.
We maybe go to someone for help when it's already broken, when the relationship is broken already.
Hoy más que nunca nosotros como iglesia estamos preocupados mucho por las relaciones matrimoniales.
As a church, we're very concerned about the marriages in
Y
the church.
estamos tratando de enfocarnos mucho
And
en ello
we're focusing on that
para cuidar los matrimonios.
to watch over.
Porque si están cuidados
marriages.
si están bien los matrimonios,
Because if the marriages are well,
los hijos también van a estar
the
bien.
children will be well too.
Entonces, por eso nos enfocamos en ellos,
And
en la
that's why we
familia.
focus on that.
Yo pienso que tal vez si cuando oren por nosotros,
When you
si hay
pray
algo-
for us,
si hay algo que podría pedir es de que oren para que el Señor prepare a más líderes
that you would pray that the Lord would raise up more leaders
y líderes que puedan impactar a las nuevas generaciones
and leaders that can also impact the new generations
con los retos que las nuevas
Ujú.
generaciones traen.
with the challenges that the new generations bring.
Entonces necesitamos orar por eso, orar
We have to pray for this,
para que cada
that
generación
each
pueda
generation
escuchar la
would
palabra
listen to God's
y,
word
y que lo pueda hacer por líderes que estén preparados,
and that they
que
can
les
become
entiendan a ellos, ¿no?
leaders that are prepared and that
Ujú.
would understand.
Entonces, orar por líderes que el Señor
To
prepare.
pray for leaders that he would prepare.
That was one of our questions too. So you kind of just answered that as well. The question, how can we pray for you? So we appreciate you answering that as well. So we may actually just kind of wrap up this recording portion of the event, but we do stay on for, we'll stay on for 10-15 more minutes. So we really encourage you guys to stay on as well. If you're able to, you'll be able to unmute yourself and we'll be able to just have some more conversation. But I do just want to say before we wrap up tonight that one, I just want to first thank Pastor Hector and Pastor Mynor for sharing with us. Again, it's just so good to hear some of these stories of the churches and what's going on. And again, we're going to continue We're going to continue the conversation, but just for time-wise, we're going to wrap up this portion. Just to let everyone know, too, our next VidaLive is in August. And that one, it's going to be really cool. We're going to kind of talk about an overview of what's going on in the ministry, looking ahead, how the ministry has been growing, what's going on. So that one's going to be on August 17th. So make sure you join us for that. But again, I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight. I want to thank our guests. And once the kind of voice comes on and says the official recording has ended, again, just please feel free to stay on. I know there's some more questions coming and we'll be able to just answer some of those. So Julie, whenever you're set, you can end this official.